I will take that off. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for spending your time with me today. My name is Danny Bradley, and I'm the Global Campaigns Officer at Madre. For those of you new to Madre, we are an international human rights organization that for over 40 years now has worked with women-led grassroots organizations to help meet their immediate needs in conflict areas and crisis, and also work alongside them to build lasting solutions to end cycles of violence. Madre has been involved in the gender justice and accountability space for decades now. So we have a long history of making gender a priority in international spaces and ensuring that affected communities are at the forefront of this work. And that brings us to why we're here today, to talk about the development of the new principles on gender persecution. I'm so glad that you've joined us today for this info session. I just looked at the names of those who have joined, and I see many familiar names and also many new ones from grassroots partners to UN agencies to global organizations. So it's really great to have you here. This is the exact coalition we need to bring together everyone to continue this important work. So thank you so much for being here and for joining us in this important activity. So we have our agenda for the day. And before I do that, we do have resources for those joining us in French and Spanish. My slides today will be in English. It was a little too cramped on the screen if we shared English, French, and Spanish, so my apologies. But what we have are the links to our resource guides. I'll talk a little bit more about the resource guides further on in this info session, but essentially the material from this info session is from the resource guide. So I have shared these links here. We have the French version first, the Spanish version second. Click those links. They will take you to our website and you can follow along there. So for today's session, we have quite an agenda ahead of us. First, we'll be discussing what the new principles are, then taking a step back to look at what gender persecution is. We'll talk about why we're developing these principles, what topics should be included, and maybe most importantly, how to get involved. That's why you're all here, to learn more about it and see how you can get involved. So we'll spend some time there. And of course, we'll end with questions. Anything you'd like to ask about this topic, we are happy to discuss. So first, the reason we're here, we're developing new principles on gender persecution. The International Criminal Court, Office of the Prosecutor, is developing this new set of principles on the crime of gender persecution. And they're focusing on four things, which we'll discuss throughout: prevention, protection, survivor participation, and relief and recovery. Civil society groups are being asked to add their voice at the outset of the process to ensure that their communities and expertise are prioritized in the new principles. The OTP, the Office of the Prosecutor, has really made a priority to ensure that any new materials that they are creating for their teams, for their staff, for their investigators, that they are informed first and foremost by experts in civil society. And they've begun to have civil society weigh in before a draft even begins, so that we have a chance to share our priorities at the beginning to make sure that this reflects our communities and those that we work with. So it is quite impressive that they are doing this. We have seen so many other efforts often skip civil society or include us at the very end. So we have to take advantage of this opportunity. Thanks to a global grassroots movement that many of you are a part of, we have made major progress in raising greater awareness of the crime of gender persecution among key stakeholders. Accountability mechanisms like the ICC themselves and others have enhanced their knowledge of gender persecution and strategies for investigating them, recognizing them, and for holding perpetrators accountable. Now, the time has come to strengthen this work and expand this progress beyond accountability to other key areas of law and response to atrocities, including those pillars of prevention, protection, participation, and relief and recovery. The principles will develop really a shared understanding of gender persecution across these pillars, and they will serve as a new tool for human rights bodies, including treaty bodies, UN peace and security experts, humanitarian actors, human rights defenders, and I'm sure others. They will strengthen the recognition of and redress for gender-based crimes and discrimination before, during, and after conflict. And that's an important component here. They will look at shared practices designed to end cycles of violence and help survivors access meaningful justice. So really, as I said, now is a critical time for civil society and experts to join this process. And that's why we are here today. So what is gender persecution? For many of you, this may be the first time you're talking about this. For some of you, you may be the experts themselves who are moving this forward. And it's important to really take a step back and think about what it is. In countries and conflicts across the globe, we know that gender-based crimes and other harms amounting to persecution take place far too often. In international criminal law, gender persecution is the main legal charge available to hold perpetrators of gender-based crimes accountable in conflicts and atrocities. There are very specific legal elements to gender persecution, which I will not discuss today. We could have a full day session. We could have a full week conference together on what those legal elements are. So I won't be discussing them today, but we do have resources on those legal elements, how to understand them, how to apply them, which I can share later on. But it really comes down to understanding the why behind a crime connected to gender. What is that why? With gender persecution, we can look not only at the murder or the torture or the sexual violence that took place, the crimes, but we can look at the gender-based reason why the perpetrator committed this crime. So, for example, perpetrators have committed gender persecution by attacking girls' schools in Afghanistan, torturing women in Mali because they deem their skirts too short, or subjecting people in Colombia to sexual violence because they perceive them as LGBTQI plus persons. There are so many other examples we could discuss from every country. The West, of course, countries in conflict and crisis, countries facing climate disaster. Sadly, everywhere you look, gender persecution is so often there. But that's why we're here, to really open our eyes to this topic and make sure that we build that accountability and justice. Documenting and pursuing justice for gender persecution can really help visibilize longstanding historical discrimination and fundamental rights deprivations against groups such as women, girls, and LGBTQI plus persons, as well as people targeted for multifaceted identities. Gender persecution allows for a very intersectional approach to looking at conflict, looking at crime, and it's a very, very powerful tool that we have seen really grow in recognition and grow in use throughout the past few years as our movement has really raised awareness of this topic. So now that we know a little bit more about gender persecution, we have to ask, why develop these principles? Well, despite being on the law books for decades, there is very little jurisprudence or legal precedent on gender persecution. It has been overlooked and misunderstood for a very long time. And for this reason, the ICC Office of the Prosecutor issued the Policy on the Crime of Gender Persecution in 2022. The policy was the first of its kind, and it was designed to strengthen accountability for gender persecution crimes. MADRE was very active in ensuring that civil society was very vocal in that process, and it really is an important groundbreaking document. However, there are no guiding principles on how to prevent or protect against gender persecution, or how to ensure that its survivors access their rights to reparations and participation in peace and transitional justice processes. So we're moving away, we're moving in addition to the accountability efforts from the ICC This new work is expanding that to look at these other aspects. So for this reason, the ICC is commissioning the principles on gender persecution. We've made a lot of progress over the years to get us to this point. The inclusion of gender persecution itself as a crime against humanity in the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court, offered a chance for victims and survivors to access justice for gender-based crimes. And that was a first and a very pivotal moment that laid the foundation for our work today. As I said, the new policy on the crime of gender persecution from the Office of the Prosecutor provided a really groundbreaking framework for accountability for this crime and has served as a powerful technical tool for accountability mechanisms. If we look at Colombia, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, referred to as the HEP, has included gender persecution charges in its cases and has recognized that perpetrators can target women and LGBTQI plus persons based on both gender and ethnicity. If we look at Afghanistan, another example, international monitors have taken up our call for holding the Taliban accountable for gender persecution in Afghanistan. So these principles will be a tool for advancing gender justice. And it's important that we look beyond our movement and we see the anti-gender forces around the globe. We need all of the tools available to us to counter anti-gender and anti-rights movements. And these principles will be a powerful step in continuing our work for gender justice, for accountability, and for ending cycles of violence and oppression that are so often linked with anti-gender policies, rhetoric, and actions. And that is why it is so crucial that feminist movements and women's and LGBTQI rights advocates speak up and show our strength by sending a groundswell of input during this open consultation period. It is very, very key for us. So what is our timeline here? Well, the Office of the Prosecutor opened a call for submissions from January to November 22nd, 2024 to help inform the development of these principles. That's a very long time. Usually we have about a month or so. So to have almost a full year gives us a really special opportunity to reach out, to have info sessions like this, to discuss this with as many people as we can to make sure that everyone's included. This extensive year-long process, it's a civil society and key stakeholder consultative process. It will engage, of course, civil society, affected communities, activists, academics, victims and survivors through workshops, briefings, meetings before and during the drafting of the principles. Advisors and staff of the ICC, Office of the Prosecutor, other accountability mechanisms, governments, and UN experts will all inform the process as well. Ultimately, the principles will blend civil society expertise and those working on the ground with communities with that of global legal experts, ensuring a really comprehensive approach that focuses on prevention, protection, survivor participation, and relief and recovery. In December 2024, at the end of this year, you can look for the results from this global consultation, and the results will inform the drafting of the principles that will begin in 2025. The end result will be the launch of the principles in October 2025 during the 25th anniversary of the UN Security Council's Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. You may have noticed throughout that the pillars that we're talking about, prevention, protection, survivor participation, and relief and recovery, are essentially the pillars of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. And that is a deliberate effort to link these worlds, to link these conversations, essentially, and to link these efforts to ensure that broader accountability and recognition. So I see a few chats. Thank you so much. I see a few hand raised. We're going to wait till the end to discuss questions so that everyone can chime in once they've learned all of the information. But certainly feel free to keep adding questions either to the Q&A, and they can be anonymous and will come to me, or to the chat, but feel free to engage with each other. It's great to see people chiming in. But I'll just wait for the end to share answers to those questions. So important. Why or how can you get involved? Well, here's a little preview. We'll talk about this more closer to the end of this info session, but I just want to give you a sneak peek. First is signing the open letter. We have the open letter available in English, Spanish, French, Farsi, and Arabic, and we'll have Ukrainian soon. This open letter is a compilation of different points from our partners and feminist activists across the world that we've compiled into one letter. And this is the easiest way for you to get involved. You can have your organization sign the letter, and every name counts, every organization counts, everyone from every country counts. So that is the simplest way, but also a very, very effective way to get involved. We also have our option to write a submission. You can write your own submission to the International Criminal Court, and they will absolutely read and review everything that is submitted. I know that for a fact. So this is your opportunity to share what gender persecution looks like to you in your communities. We'll talk more about that later on. And then we have our resource guide. A huge part of this effort is making sure that people know that this is happening, making sure that they know what gender persecution is and how they can help. So we have our resource guide available, and I've shared the English and the English, French, and Spanish with you earlier, and we'll show you where you can find the other ones later on. But now with those kind of sneak preview, we can talk a little bit more about what these contributions can look like, how you can actually submit something, what types of things to be thinking about as you continue in this process. So I've been talking about these 4 pillars, and really those 4 pillars are the key kind of points here, the key things to think about as we go. This is what informed our open letter and the input we got for that. And this is also what we suggest informs submissions to the court. So the first is prevention. Preventing gender persecution requires improving strategies to prevent gender violence before conflicts or atrocities occur. Strategies can include prosecuting those responsible for violations of international law. It could include strengthening women's rights and LGBTQI rights under national laws, supporting local women's peace initiatives and conflict resolution processes, and implementing laws to prevent gender-based violence, particularly against women, girls, and including LGBTQI plus persons. So we have some key questions for your consideration, things that we think are important to think of for prevention. So first, what are important strategies or activities for preventing gender persecution before conflict even begins? Second, what types of laws or policies are important to prevent gender persecution before conflict begins? And how can prevention strategies be intersectional and include all marginalized communities that are vulnerable to gender persecution? These can be really specific to your context. If you're a global expert, how does this look on a global scale? Maybe your submission could be a little more technical or legal. If you're a local grassroots activist, maybe you don't have a technical submission, but you have examples of what prevention looks like in your community or what your suggestions for prevention are. These don't have to be things that are actively happening in your country. These can be things that we are working towards in this movement. The next is protection. Protection from gender persecution requires implementation of informed strategies to protect women, girls, LGBTQI plus people from gender-based violence, including sexual violence, in the context of conflict and atrocities. So that's during our emergency situation or during our humanitarian setting, such as in a refugee camp. So key questions there are, during conflict and atrocities, how do we ensure that women, LGBTQI plus persons, and all communities are protected against acts of gender persecution? And how can humanitarian aid systems and human rights frameworks best protect against gender persecution and all gender-based crimes? So that's definitely an important one. That focuses on kind of in the moment, in the crisis. It's unique within these 3 pillars because the other ones focus a little bit more on the before or the after. But this is certainly an important one, and the court needs to hear from us all on this topic. The third is participation. A survivor-centered approach to accountability and peace building requires meaningful participation of women, LGBTQI plus people at all levels of decision making, including in the national, regional, and international governance, in peace and transitional justice mechanisms, as well as other restorative justice processes. So, key questions for your consideration for this are: who are survivors of gender persecution? And why is their participation in peace and transitional justice processes important? What do survivors of gender persecution need in order to ensure their safe and meaningful participation in humanitarian responses, in peace negotiations, and in peace building? And how do we ensure that transitional and restorative justice processes and other accountability mechanisms meaningfully include gender persecution survivors? This is a huge part of our work at Madre. In the countries that we work with our partners, so often survivors of gender persecution are stigmatized and are afraid to come forward because of what they'll face in their communities, or the legal system doesn't really recognize them. So this is a very, very important pillar that I hope you all consider and that you share, because I know that many of us face this issue and face concerns here for our communities. So I really encourage you to take a look at this one. And then fourth and finally, relief and recovery. So this is relief and recovery essentially are measures that must address international crises, and they must be through a gendered lens, including by respecting the civilian and humanitarian nature of refugee camps. They must consider the needs of women, girls, and or including LGBTQI plus persons in the design of refugee camps and settlements. So that's just an example focusing on refugee camps. But what does relief and recovery look like to you? So some questions to consider here. How do humanitarian actors reach communities and safely conduct outreach to survivors of gender persecution to ensure that they have access to relief and recovery? And then what types of relief and recovery measures do gender persecution survivors need? This is very linked to the participation. How do we safely ensure that victims and survivors are included both in the decision-making processes, they'll focus more on participation, but also receive what they deserve in terms of safe spaces, in terms of support, services, certainly redress? How can we really make sure that the court understands what our communities are going through and what that looks like? So those are our four pillars and our four kind of key aspects. So we'll return to how to get involved. The open letter, which I'll show you in a minute, includes these pillars and includes some thinking on kind of a high-level approach, a global approach to what these could look like in different communities, compiled from our partners and our experience over the years. So that is certainly something you're welcome to join. We've seen that these sign-on letters are so effective with the court and with other accountability mechanisms because it gives them a very concise way to understand what feminists, activists, and advocates are thinking, what local groups are thinking, so they can be so effective. So I encourage you to sign the open letter, and I will show you that in a minute. Where some of these guiding questions really come in are for writing a submission. I'm often asked by different people as I speak to them about this work and other work that the court has done. We don't have legal expertise, so we can't write a submission. Not true. You do not need legal expertise to submit anything to the International Criminal Court. What really matters to them is to hear from you about what you are seeing in your community. These questions that we have, I think, give a little bit of a structure and a little bit of a framework for how to think through what they're thinking through. But really, it is showing them how gender persecution can be addressed before, during, and after conflict in your context. So again, maybe you're a global expert and you have a little bit more of a global approach. Maybe you work on the national level, working with national laws that could prevent such a thing. Maybe you work in humanitarian spaces at a national level, or maybe you work in a specific neighborhood in a specific small town. That is all Great. That is all really equally important to the court. So it's that opportunity that you have to write a submission. It can be a paragraph, it can be 20 pages, it can be whatever is important to you, kind of based on some of these guiding questions. And within these four pillars, what matters to you? What matters to those you work with? What do you want the International Criminal Court to hear before they begin this process? I have seen with the policy paper on gender persecution that civil society was very much listened to, that the court genuinely wants to know what we are thinking, what we are seeing, how we are working on things, what solutions we have. So this is crucial. This is a crucial component. And really, we need that groundswell of submissions to show them that we are here, we are a force to be reckoned with, and that it has to be a priority, that we must have the most inclusive approach to gender persecution that we can before, during, and after conflict. And then there's our resource guide. So the resource guide essentially has the content of this info session. It has a little bit more on each topic, of course, since we're here just for an hour together. But it has information on the progress that we've made, on a little bit more about gender persecution and the technicalities there. It also has a little bit more on the four pillars and what those could look like for you. And then it has a little bit about the history, if you're interested in a little bit more context of how we got to this moment in time, how we got to this aspect of the work. It focuses on MADRE's journey within international criminal law spaces and gender justice, making sure that local communities and women-led groups have a seat at the table and are at really the forefront of these conversations. So the resource guide is a really important tool. It also has links in there to the open letter. It has links to various other things that would be really helpful. So the hope is that they all kind of build on each other, that if you are willing to join us in this effort, you can really approach this however you'd like, kind of going up in involvement, signing the open letter, writing a submission, and then sharing the resource guide. So I've stopped sharing my screen for a moment because I want to show you all where you can find more of these resources. The main page, which I will put in the chat now, the main page is on the Madre website. And here is the link there. I will open this up and share my screen for you all to see as well, just so I can guide you through it. That is something that you can easily share as well. It can be just a link, just in an email, whatever works for you. And it looks like this. It is in English, but we'll have the resources in different languages below, which I'll show you. So you come to this page, madre.org/gender-persecution. And then you'll scroll down here. Of course, feel free to read the introduction. But then you'll see this section in purple, the Principles on Gender Persecution. Join us. You've already joined us in part of this effort, so we're really happy to have you here. So I hope you feel included in this. And if you just scroll down, it has some information for those who are new. And these drop-down buttons here are where you find everything you need. So you can sign the open letter. This will take you to the English version, and I'll just show you what that looks like. It has a little bit of background. It has links to all of the other language versions that we have available, so that if you happen to come across the English but you only speak Spanish or French, you can easily click here. We have some key points here, as I talked about. So these are broader, and they are focused on really an inclusive understanding of gender, an inclusive understanding of gender persecution, and the history that we have in building that. So I'll just show you the form down here. It's very simple. Add your organization name, city and region, just so we know where people are joining from, the name of the person signing, their title, and the email. So that's the open letter. And again, those are all available here in our different languages, and we'll add more languages as we get them. For writing your own submission, you can find the email here. It's in the PowerPoint as well and in the resource guide. But you can find the email to the Office of the Prosecutor to which you will submit your submissions, and our deadline is here as well. And then for guidance on what can go in that submission, we have the resource guides. We have them in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Dari. And I'll just click the English one here as it opens up. Those of you following along in French and Spanish, you are well acquainted with this by now. But we have the resource guide here. As I said, it's a bit longer so that it has just more information, more in-depth analysis of this project, why it's important, links to things like the policy on gender persecution, a little bit more information, and then I'll just scroll down to the bottom here. So the same links as before. This brings you to the English, and each corresponding resource guide has a link to its corresponding open letter. So French links to French, Spanish to Spanish, for example, the information on where to submit and how to spread the word, and then some more information there. So that's where you can go, madre.org/gender-persecution. That is the best place to look for all of these materials. And it is the best place to really come back to if you lose track of things or emails that brought you here today. You can certainly hop there to that website at any point in time to do that. And then what I'll also put in the chat is an email address that you can email with any questions. This is coming to my team here at Madre, and I'll be the one to help out and answer any questions you have. So let me just put that in the chat. Okay. Great. And that is a really great, chance to write to us. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know if you've submitted. If you submit to the court, I'd love to read it. I'd love to know what communities like yours are submitting. It's really important for us to stay in touch throughout this process so we can help each other out, that we can work together to really build this momentum, honestly, to make sure that people know about this. So with that, I will stop speaking. I've been speaking for quite a bit of time in this webinar format. So I will open up the chat. It's already open there, and we'll take a look at any Q&A situation and any Q&A questions here that I will take a look at as well. But feel free to add any questions that you have either to the Q&A or the chat, and we'll give a few moments there. Let me just pull those up quickly, and we'll see what we have. Okay. So I have a question on generally what is Madre's contribution. So really what we're doing is serving as kind of the clearinghouse for civil society input. We found time and time again throughout our 40 years that too often when international mechanisms embark on an important process, they may try to reach out to civil society, and the court has done a really great job of doing that. But civil society often doesn't know about it. There isn't really a way for some local groups to know about this if they're not kind of in these circles, which is certainly a challenge that the court has, and a challenge that is so prevalent in the UN system. So what Madre does, working with our grassroots partners and alongside them in so many different contexts, is to kind of bridge that gap for them, to ensure that our partners have access to international spaces. So that's really what we're doing here, to make sure that organizations or even UN agencies or experts who may not have known that this process is happening have the tools that they need to really participate. We have this open letter, of course, that compiles certain points. I think they're for people on this call and this movement, they're generally amenable to everyone here. But of course, if you have other points to make, that's where the submission comes in. That's where you can really put your thoughts together to submit. we've had people ask in the past for kind of more guidance on what submissions can look like. So that's why we put together the guiding questions on the pillars to help you think through what those submissions could be. So that's where Madre comes into all this. We work closely with the court to ensure that civil society is included. But I will say, of course, that the court has its challenges. We know that. We know a feminist critique of everything is important. And of course, the court as an international mechanism certainly has challenges and things that we need to work through. But it is such an important mechanism with a lot of influence in really what mechanisms around the world, what other countries do. So we know that we have to be engaged. We cannot be left out of this space, or there may not be really a feminist analysis there. So we need to make sure that we're involved. It's a very similar approach to why many organizations work with the UN. There's so many flaws in the system, as we know, but it is really important for us to be there. It's important for us to speak our truth, to speak power to speak truth to power, as they say, and that's part of this work as well. So I'm just checking on other questions. So we have a question about gender persecution principles being applied only in countries with ongoing armed conflict. In many Latin American countries, the highest rates of femicide, transfemicide, lesbicide, there are no conflicts officially recognized, given the way that conflict is defined. Therefore, no possibility of gender persecution. Yet, is alarming currently the increase of anti-gender legislation and far-right conservative groups. How can we push for a more holistic definition of conflict? How could the submissions be an opportunity to expand the framework utilized by the ICC to define conflict? Well, I'll be honest that I'm maybe not the best person to answer how we could define conflict. I might leave that to more legal experts who have much more expertise in that realm than I do. But on the topic of armed ongoing conflict and whether this applies, it definitely applies to conflict, but it does apply to peacetime. Crimes against humanity are applicable not only in conflict, but in peacetime. And what these principles really are trying to do is expand beyond that, expand beyond these kind of rigid definitions we have of conflict and when something is determined as such, so that we can look at prevention before conflict or crisis begins. What happens if if a country is officially out of conflict, whatever that may mean? What happens for that relief and recovery? What happens for that survivor participation? So I would encourage you to definitely think beyond conflict, think beyond an armed activity to situations that may not be official conflicts, or even those who at the moment have, perfectly peaceful situations. This applies to everyone. We need to ensure that each country, each region has a really robust approach to gender persecution and preventing it before something even occurs. So I would encourage all of you to think beyond conflict, of course. If you are working in a conflict situation, absolutely, it is important to think of that and what accountability looks like there. But for those of you not, certainly feel free to go beyond it. I hope that answers your question. I am just reading a few questions. And I'm seeing a few in the chat as well. So I'm going back and forth between the Q&A and chat. I see a question about the link, but I'll reshare the link in a moment. Great to see some joining from Afghanistan. Many questions about Afghanistan. There's a lot of confusion on the difference between the two. Yes. So again, gender apartheid, I'm not the best expert on my team to discuss that, but certainly gender apartheid and gender persecution are two different conversations that have been happening, but I would argue that they are very linked, and they're really just looking at some different things within the same conversation. So they're absolutely linked. There's an analysis that Madre has done. I think there are a few others that have done as well, showing when something is a situation of gender apartheid, when something is gender persecution, when they overlap, when they are different. Um, I think the key takeaway here is that um, fighting for an inclusive recognition of gender apartheid and gender persecution is the most important thing. We are, working in the same spaces. We're all working for that gender justice inclusion. So really pairing the two together is what's important. And to the question of other opportunities to discuss this and kind of keep civil society aware, absolutely. On this topic of the principles, we'll be having multiple info sessions throughout the year in different languages. We had one in Farsi and Arabic in April. We'll be having another one in June that might focus a little more specifically on the protection aspects of this pillar. But if you attended today, then you'll be getting emails from me with more information on other ways to get involved, other info sessions to join, and we can see what's relevant for you and kind of where people fit in. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see what else we have here. So there's a question on if these principles are exclusively for gender-based persecution, or if we can really look at intersectional issues like race, ethnicity, really together with gender persecution. Absolutely. Yes, that is a fantastic question, and I think a really, really important one. When we think of gender persecution, it is, of course, gender's in the name. It is the focus of the crime and focus of these principles. But it would not be effective if we do not have an intersectional approach. If we do not look at race, ethnicity, disability, class, wealth, so many things. There are so many we could name, and there are many aspects within the Rome Statute itself that does include different persecuted groups. So I would encourage you to take a look there if you wanted to think about it within the framework of the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court. They do have that list. But this is really whatever links gender persecution has for you, share them with the ICC. If it's gender and race, gender and ethnicity, gender and disability, whatever it may be. In Madre's work across the world, we work with many Afro-descendant communities who are definitely making the link between gender persecution in Iraq, between Afro-Iraqis and what they're facing from gender-based crimes, certainly in Colombia, with Afro-descendant communities there that we work very closely with, and they've been getting much more recognition from the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. So if you have an intersectional community or any intersection at all that you work with, that you have expertise with and really experience with, share that with the ICC. It is crucial for them to know that and to make sure that there is a really inclusive approach. The policy paper on gender persecution does a really good job of highlighting how it can be intersectional and inclusive. So I would encourage you to take a look at that if you have some specific questions on the legal aspects of how you can do that. But it is absolutely happening around the world, and I would absolutely encourage you to go there. Looking at a few other questions. There's a question about how we can partner with Madre and working on the 4 pillars. I love that question. That's great. Email advocacy@madre.org and we can discuss. We're a small team, so we have limited capacity in what we're able to do, which is why we're doing some info sessions for more broader audiences like you all, because we may not be able to talk to every person, but let us know and we can work together to see what we're able to collaborate on. Really the most useful and helpful thing in this movement, not even working with Madre, but for just kind of zooming out to really the strength of the pillars would be to tap into these resources, to share the resource guide on your own with organizations that you work with or your networks, to sign the open letter and to encourage others to do so. Maybe you can team up with organizations to write different submissions together or separate. In the past, I know that, for example, a coalition of Iraqi organizations submitted a submission to the policy paper a few years ago. We worked with a group of Afghan women activists to submit something that really reflected their experience in the early days of the crisis there in the end of 2021. So there are many different ways you can go about this. You can team up with organizations like yours that maybe work on disability rights, or certainly there are links with climate justice. Absolutely. The court is also working on a new policy on environmental crimes. So what are the links that you can make there between preventing both climate crises and gender persecution? So there are so many ways that you can do this based on your expertise and really what you're interested in sharing. But ultimately, you can email us, and we can see what we're able to do together. Even just encouraging people to come to these info sessions to learn more about it is certainly one way to go. Okay, I'm just looking at the Q&A to make sure I got everything here. Great. Let's see. Let's see. Just looking through everything. Thank you to those chiming in. I hope I can get to everyone. I'm just scrolling through here. I see a lot of contributions here on LGBTQI plus people, and I want to certainly emphasize that aspect of this project. And this is something where, of course, the anti-gender movements and around the world have really harmed so many lives, and something that these principles hopefully can work on addressing. When people think of gender-based crimes, they often think of women only, which is of course important, but we certainly need to include LGBTQI plus people whose voices have been silenced, just like women. Historically, there's longstanding discrimination that we need to include. Ultimately, gender persecution affects everyone. Everyone could be a victim or a survivor of gender persecution. But it is up to organizations like us to really highlight to the powerful actors of the world how historical discrimination has impacted women, LGBTQI plus folks, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, Afro-descendant groups. There's so many there, and that's where that intersectional approach comes in, that everyone has gender. Everyone can be impacted by this, and it is really important to show those dynamics there. So thank you for highlighting a lot of the queer aspects of this conversation. I appreciate that. See a few more. Sharing of emails, great. Love to see some connections being made. I see a request to come on and speak. I'm not able to do that just for fairness of everyone else coming up to speak, but feel free to share in the chat any thoughts that you have. They're definitely welcome. If I had more time and if we had more space, we could certainly do that. I just know that some people are here anonymously, and we want to make sure that the security is cleared. So if I give anyone speaking, they may see the attendees. So I just want to make sure that security is kept. So I appreciate the request, but I'll need to move on to the other questions. A question about Haiti. and if we have kind of a political position on Haiti. We do work really closely with some amazing partners in Haiti. We've worked in Haiti for a very long time now, with a range of different partners on different issues. Um, and we're working actively to advocate with our Haitian partners, with US policymakers and international policymakers. I actually spent a week in March at the Commission on the Status of Women with an amazing leader from the Haitian Women's Collective. And we were there focusing on climate justice within Haiti. But it was the exact same week where a lot of the news was coming out about the political changes in Haiti. It was at the time of the closures of the airport, for example, because of the violence, and one of our partners could not fly to New York to join us at the UN. So we do work really actively in Haiti. When it comes to gender persecution in Haiti, this is a really interesting example of where so many of these pillars could play a really important role. Especially if, people may or may not consider Haiti in a conflict situation as it would be determined. But there is so much that could be said of working on gender persecution in the prevention, in the protection, in the participation and relief and recovery aspects. This is where some of that crisis comes in rather than conflict. It could be as unfortunately Haiti has dealt with, the earthquakes. It could be other climate crises that many other countries are dealing with. So thinking broader than conflict to where gender persecution comes into play there, and Haiti is certainly no exception to that. So I think those are all the questions that I see on my end. I'm sorry if I missed any, but as we're coming up to the end here, I think I will wrap things up, and I can reshare some of the links for those of you who are able to stay. But I will just say a very sincere thank you to those of you who joined today. We really, really appreciate it. This is a really important moment for gender justice in the world, and having those people like you join us is so crucial and so important. I'm so happy that you were able to be here and engage in the chat, engage in the questions, and hopefully learn a little bit from me of how you can get involved. You have the resources available for you. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. I really, really encourage you to sign the open letter today. I know that the deadline is November, but we really need to build momentum now so that we can keep this conversation going throughout the year to make sure that as many people as possible can be involved. So sign that open letter today. Feel free to start your submission today, share the resource guide today, whatever it takes to make sure that this effort is important, that others are hearing from you about this now that you've learned from me. I hope that you share this information. It's a really important moment, as I've said. So we are so grateful that you are here to join us today. Thank you to our interpreters who are fantastic and really here supporting us today as well. We will follow up with additional information. And I really thank you again for being here. And that's it for me. I will stop the recording and I'll stay on for a few minutes to share the links. But otherwise, thank you so much. And I hope you all stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.